Inks have an unmatched charm. They're versatile, fun, and just one step away from being a tattoo. But what are the best types of inks for certain styles and how to use them creatively? That's what we're getting into today. Welcome to the channel. It's me, and let's dive right in. There are so many options out there, from India ink to acrylic to fountain pen, and each has their own pros and cons depending on the look you want to achieve. In fact, just look at all these brands available in the art store. So overwhelming. But let me start by breaking down the common types of inks and their general uses. Then we'll look at the most popular ones and how they react to various paper types. Alright, first up, we got India ink. This stuff is thick, pigmented, and typically only comes in black. The carbon-based formula makes it great for bold line work, calligraphy, and covering larger areas like splatters or even washing onto the page for those dramatic black and white looks. Just take a look at all those different ways it can be applied. Once it dries, it's waterproof, so no worries about smudging. Next up is acrylic ink. These guys are pigment-based, so they come in a rainbow of colors. Acrylic ink dries pretty fast, has a good level of saturation, and works well on a bunch of different paper types. It's great for covering small or large areas, fine line work, and building up layers of color. After that is alcohol ink. Now this type is super fun. It's also pigment-based, and since it's alcohol-based, it sits on top of the paper rather than soaking in like acrylic. This means you can get some interesting effects, like lifting up the color with more alcohol to reveal the lighter colors underneath. And just like watercolors, alcohol inks blend really well, which opens up a lot of possibilities for gradients and complex patterns. Alcohol inks dry fast, are very saturated, and the colors tend to be a bit transparent. Finally, we have fountain pen inks, which aren't technically an ink, but we just had to include them because they're so awesome. These are dye-based, so again, come in lots of colors and you get to choose the level of saturation and how transparent or opaque they are based on how much pigment you load into your pen. There's a ton of variety out there. Now that you know the basics, let's talk about some paper types and how they interact with inks. First, we have Bristol board. This is a smooth, sturdy paper that's made specifically for ink and marker artists. Ink goes on smoothly, doesn't bleed, and gives crisp lines, especially with India ink. Moving on, you have watercolor paper, which can be hot press or cold press. Hot press watercolor paper has a smooth, even surface and a high cotton content, making it acid-free and long-lasting. Ink takes to it pretty well, giving nice clean lines and soft washes. Cold press paper has a rougher texture and more of a rough edge feel to it. Ink will bleed and grain more on this paper, giving it a worn, textured look. Next, we have drawing paper, which is typically a good middle ground between Bristol board and watercolor paper. Ink usually performs well on it, but it depends on the brand and quality. Finally, we have Yupo paper, which is a synthetic paper made of polyester. Since ink sits on top of the paper instead of soaking in, you can get some unique effects, especially with alcohol inks. You can even use a heat gun to activate the ink. So now you know the main players and how they work. Let's see how they can be used creatively. Here are 5 techniques to try. 1. How to use inks creatively. Start by dipping a pen or brush into the ink and tapping off the excess. Hold the paper at an angle and practice your stroke. 2. Line work and detailing. Use dip pens or technical pens with India ink for crisp outlines. This works great for comic panels, character contours, or dramatic contrasts. 3. Wash techniques. Dilute ink with water to create gradient washes and subtle shadows. Layer washes for depth in characters or landscapes like smoky skies. 4. Splash effects and textures. Flick ink from a brush for gritty splatter, perfect for edgy branding. Use sponges or even old toothbrushes to create texture around logos or packaging art. 5. Ink and craft fusion. Alcohol inks plus ceramic mugs equals swirling branded drinkware. Try walnut ink on craft paper labels for rustic old red authenticity. And finally, number 6. Mixed media magic. Combine acrylic inks with paint markers, charcoal, or digital overlays. Layering inks over watercolor or gouache adds contrast and punch to product art or animation cells. As far as tools go, you really don't need anything special. A simple water brush or bee or softer hairbrushes work great for most things. For smaller details or lettering, try a G-nib or finer technical pen. You can even use a dropper for delicate color drops or splatters. For a fountain pen, you obviously need a fountain pen. Experiment with both flexible and rigid nibs for different line weights. So now you know how to use inks, the tools to use, and some creative techniques to try. Let's put it all together with some pro tips. First up, try hot-press watercolor paper for smoother effects or Yupo paper for alcohol ink magic. Always test your ink on scrap first. Some bleed, some dry, opaque. And lastly, seal your work with spray fixative to avoid smudges or fading. If you want to explore how different inks could bring your characters to life in new ways, here's a little basic line practice. Go slow for straight lines and faster for curves. Keep your hand relaxed, let the pen glide. And remember, always test first. If you want gritty or rustic labels, cold press or craft paper with acrylic ink gives texture and mood. If you want glossy, bright, and even coverage, Bristol board with India ink is your jam. And if you're feeling crazy, why not doodle on a plastic bag for a unique look and feel? To help you decide, here are a few real-world examples of ink reactions on different paper types. In the end, it's all about experimenting, having fun, and finding what works best for your art and style. And hey, if you're still confused or overwhelmed, come back and visit often to see some of our own inking adventures. Until next time, happy inking!